I cannot fear death anymore. That capacity just left me. Like a switch that got turned off while I was gone and nobody thought to turn it back on when I came back. I have stood at the edge of parking lots at night, walked through hospitals without flinching. Sat with people in their final hours without the tightness in my chest that every living person carries into those rooms. That fear is just gone. And honestly, that might be the most radical thing that happened to me. More radical than anything I saw on the other side. Because the woman who went in was terrified of dying, and the woman who came out simply wasn't anymore. My name is Sarah Mitchell. 9 days. That is how long my brain showed no clinical activity. 9 days in which the people who loved me said goodbye, made decisions, and slowly began to understand that I wasn't coming back. And I want to talk to you today about what I was doing during those 9 days, because I wasn't nowhere. I was somewhere very specific. And I was with people you would recognize. People that you have lost. If this is the first time you're finding this channel, please subscribe. What I share here is not easy to talk about, and it helps me keep talking when I know someone is actually listening. And before we go any further, drop a comment below. Tell me the name of someone you've lost. You'll understand why I'm asking that in a few minutes. Let me start with the clinical part, because I think it matters. I think the body tells a story even when the mind is somewhere else entirely. I was 34 years old. I had a brain aneurysm that ruptured without warning. One moment, I was making coffee in my kitchen, and the next moment, I was on the floor. My husband found me about 40 minutes later. By the time the ambulance arrived, I was already gone in every measurable sense that medicine recognizes. The doctors told my husband that the pressure in my skull was catastrophic. That the blood pooling in my brain had essentially compressed the structures responsible for consciousness, breathing regulation, everything. They told him that if I survived, I would not be the same person. That the damage was, and this is a word that kept appearing in my medical records, irreversible. 9 days later, I opened my eyes. The first thing the neurologist noticed was that I was tracking him with my eyes. Following his hand, responding to his voice. This was not supposed to happen. The hemorrhage had been massive. The scans from day 2 showed widespread damage across multiple areas. And yet, there I was, looking at him, confused, asking in a whisper where my husband was. The tests they ran over the following weeks showed something that the team kept calling, in careful clinical language, unexplained. There was evidence of prior damage in the scans, deep scarring, but the function that should have been destroyed by that damage was intact. They couldn't explain the gap between what the imaging showed and what I was actually doing. They still can't. What I know is this: my body was here the whole time. It was holding a place, and everything that was essential, every part of me that makes me me, was somewhere else entirely. I want to describe what that somewhere looked like, but I have to do it carefully, because language is a very small tool for a very large space. The best I can do is run the two worlds side by side, because that's actually how it felt. There was this world, the hospital room, the machines, my husband's voice reading to me from a chair beside my bed, his hand on my arm, and I was aware of all of it. Not as a dream, not distantly. I could feel his hand. I could hear the words he was reading. I was just also somewhere else at the same time, in a place that was more real than any place I have ever stood with these feet. The way I describe it now is that here, this world, the one you and I are living in right now, is like watching a movie in a dark theater. You know the images on the screen are technically flat. You know they're light bouncing off a surface. But you get caught up in them, you feel them, they move you. That's here. And the other place was like stepping outside the theater and realizing for the first time that there's an actual sky, actual air, actual ground under your feet, actual depth in every direction. That's the comparison that comes closest. Here is the projection. There is the original. And in that place, I was not alone. I need you to hear this next part carefully, because I know it will be easy to dismiss, and I am asking you not to. I know it sounds like exactly what you'd expect someone who had a near-death experience to say. I know the psychological literature. I know about oxygen deprivation and temporal lobe activity and the brain constructing familiar imagery under stress. I have read all of it. And I want to tell you that none of it accounts for the specific things I was told in that place. Because information came back with me that I had no way of knowing. And some of it has since been confirmed in ways that I cannot explain away. But I'll get to that. First, I need to tell you about the people. The first person I saw was my grandmother. She died when I was 11. She had Alzheimer's by the end, and the last few years of her life, she didn't know who I was. She would look at me across the table with a kind of polite confusion, the way you look at a stranger who reminds you of someone. It broke my mother. It broke all of us, honestly, this woman who had been so warm, so present, so absolutely certain of her love for us, looking at us like we were strangers. That was the version of her I had carried in my memory for 23 years. The woman I saw in that place was nothing like that. She was entirely herself. More herself than I had ever experienced her, actually. The sharpness she had in the early photographs, before I was born, it was all there. And the first thing she said to me was my name. Not my mother's name, not a polite confusion. My name. And then she said, "She knows. Your mother knows I knew her all along. Tell her I knew." I did not know, before that moment, that my mother had been carrying the grief of those final years. I knew it had been hard. But I didn't know that the specific wound for her was the question of whether her mother had known her at the end. I found out after I came back that my mother had never said this out loud to anyone. She told me, when I shared what my grandmother had said, that she had kept it entirely private. This quiet devastation, that the woman who gave birth to her had looked at her like a stranger in those final years. And here was the message: she knew. She always knew. That is not a thing my oxygen-depleted brain invented. That is specific, targeted information delivered to address a grief I didn't know existed. But my grandmother wasn't the only one there. And this is the part I need you to sit with, because it changes everything about how I think about the people we lose. There were others. A man I recognized as my college roommate's father. A man I had met twice. He had died in a car accident years earlier. He was there, and he was trying to communicate something about his son. There were people I recognized vaguely, faces from the edges of my life, people who had passed years or decades before. And they were not passive. They were not floating in some peaceful, static eternity. They were present. They were aware. And they were aware of us, of the people still here, with a kind of focused, concerned attention that I can only describe as love that has gotten more precise because it has more perspective. And then Jesus was there. I'm not going to try to describe that fully. I'll just say that the moment I was aware of him, everything else became background. Not because the others disappeared or became less real, but because the light that accompanied him changed the quality of everything in the space. It's the difference between a room lit by a single candle and the same room when someone opens the curtains on a sunny day. The candle was real, the candle was warm. But the sunlight revealed dimensions of the room the candle hadn't reached. He didn't open with theology. He didn't open with judgment. The first thing he communicated, and I say communicated because it wasn't entirely spoken language, it was closer to direct knowing, was recognition. Like being known completely, every part, every corner, every regret, every secret, and being loved without reservation in spite of all of it. I have tried to describe this to people, and the closest I can get is this. Imagine being seen entirely and not flinching. That's what that felt like. And then he showed me something. He showed me the people there, my grandmother, the others. And he made something clear that has restructured every assumption I had about death and grief, and the distance between here and there. The people I had lost were not waiting in some vague paradise, indifferent to the world they had left. They were connected to it. They carried specific things for specific people. Not unfinished business in the anxious sense, not trapped, not suffering, but deliberately present, deliberately attentive, as if part of their ongoing existence was a continued participation in the lives of the people they loved. And each one of them had something to give. A message. A specific thing meant for a specific person still living. He showed me this as a reality, not as a comfort. And what I understood, what I brought back with me, was that the wall we experience between us and the dead is one-directional. We can't see them. We can't hear them clearly. We can't feel them the way we could when they were in bodies. But they are not similarly obstructed. They see us. They know what we're carrying. They know what we regret. They know the questions we never got to ask. And they are not silent because they have nothing to say. The silence is a feature of our side of the wall, not theirs. That knowledge came back with me, and it changed grief entirely. I need to pause here, because I want to give you something concrete. After I came back and was well enough to have real conversations, I started doing something almost involuntarily. I would be talking with someone, a nurse, a friend's mother, a stranger at a grocery store. And I would suddenly know something. Not dramatically. Not with any light show or revelation, just a quiet knowing that arrived in the middle of an ordinary exchange. A name. A piece of undecay business. A thing the living person was carrying about someone they had lost. The first time it happened clearly enough that I couldn't ignore it, I was talking with one of my nurses. She had been kind to me through the recovery, checking in beyond what her shift required. One morning, she came in early, and I could feel, and I don't have a better word for feel, that there was a man connected to her, someone she had lost, and that this person wanted her to stop apologizing for something. I didn't know the context. I just had the feeling and the word, apologizing. I told her, quietly, that I didn't know if this would land right, but that I had a sense that someone she loved wanted her to know she didn't need to keep saying sorry. She left the room. Came back 5 minutes later with red eyes. Her brother had died 3 years earlier, after an estrangement she felt responsible for. She had been apologizing to him in her head every day since the funeral. She said she hadn't told a single person about this. Not her husband, not her therapist. She had carried it alone for 3 years. I'm not telling you this to make a claim about my abilities, because honestly, I don't know what those experiences are or where they come from. What I'm telling you is what they confirmed. These connections are active. The attention from that side is real and specific, and it knows exactly what we are carrying. It is not generic comfort. It is targeted. It addresses the actual thing. And that specific quality, the precision of it, is the detail that stays with me more than anything else about the 9 days. It would be easier in some ways if what I experienced was a beautiful fog. A warm light and a general sense of peace and the vague suggestion that love continues. That would be easier to metabolize. What I got instead was concrete. Specific. Named. And that specificity is what makes it impossible for me to soft pedal it, even now, even knowing how it sounds. I want to be honest with you about something. The experience didn't give me all the answers. It gave me answers that immediately created larger, stranger questions. I came back knowing that consciousness does not end at death. I don't just believe that, I know it the way I know my own name. But I came back not knowing the full mechanics of what I experienced. I came back certain that the people I saw were real and present and genuinely trying to communicate, but uncertain about the nature of the space in between, uncertain about what determines who can reach across and how, uncertain about the timing of things, uncertain about what it means for how we live here. The experience didn't resolve the mystery. It just moved me to a different position inside it, and that is something I've been sitting with for years now. Because the woman who had the aneurysm, the woman who fell on the kitchen floor, she was someone who believed, sort of, in the way that people believe things they've never had to actually put weight on. Faith as furniture. something that occupied space in the room without ever being sat in. That woman is gone. The hemorrhage killed her as surely as if she'd never come back. And who came back in her place is someone I am still learning to recognize. The old identity, the one built on all the small certainties and fears and habits and roles, it died in those 9 days. I couldn't recover it even when I tried. The things that had defined me felt like a coat that no longer fit. I would reach for the familiar anxieties, and they weren't there. I would reach for the old reactions and find something different underneath. My husband said, gently, in those first weeks, that he was married to a woman he loved but didn't entirely recognize yet. And he was right. Something had been composted in that 9 days. Turned under. What grew was slower, it didn't announce itself. It wasn't a transformation I could put in a frame and hang on the wall. It was more like the first thing I understood, day by day, was a purpose I hadn't consented to before the aneurysm. I had been living in the direction of safety. A perfectly reasonable thing to do. But safety had meant keeping the largest questions at arm's length. After I came back, the largest questions were the only ones that interested me. Every other thing felt like noise. The purpose that showed itself, quietly, over months and years, was this: to carry what I saw back to people who were carrying grief. Not to perform certainty, I don't have that to give. But to deliver the specific thing I was shown, which is that the people you have lost are not absent. They are attending to you with something very close to urgency. They are holding something for you that they want you to receive. That is not a metaphor. That is what I saw. And the bread that gets made from all of that, from the dying of the old self, from the hidden purpose, from the slow growing, is this conversation. Is this channel. Is every time I get to say to someone who is carrying the particular weight of an unclosed goodbye, it isn't over. The conversation isn't over. So, I want to ask you to do something. Not right now, tonight, or this week, when you have an hour and the house is quiet. I want you to think about someone specific that you've lost. Not in the abstract grief that accumulates around a name over time, but the actual person, the voice, the way they laughed, the specific texture of who they were. And I want you to sit with the possibility, not as wishful thinking, but as a serious proposition, that they know exactly what you're carrying right now, that they have been watching, that what you feel as silence on their end is not indifference, but the limitation of the wall between here and there. If you could receive a message from that person, not a vague sense of peace, but a specific thing, one sentence, what would you want it to be? I'm asking because that question matters. Because part of what I came back understanding is that asking the question is itself a kind of opening. Not a technique, not a ritual. Just the act of making yourself available to receive. Of not treating the grief as a final verdict on connection. Before you go, if this channel is new to you, please subscribe. Every time someone subscribes, it tells me to keep talking, and this is not easy material to keep talking about. And I really do want you to leave a comment. Tell me who you're thinking about right now. Tell me the name. Tell me what you wish you'd said, or what you wish they knew. I read everyone. And I found, in doing this for as long as I have, that the act of writing it down, of naming it and sending it out, does something. I don't know exactly what. I'm still searching. That's the honest version of where I am. The experience cracked everything open. And I am still, every day, standing in the middle of what poured out, trying to understand the shape of it. What I know for certain, you are not as far from the people you've lost as the silence makes it feel. They are close. They are attentive. And they have something to say.